Mathematics have been the subject that I disliked the most, but more than that was a time that I was terrified of mathematics. And I guess to this day there's much trauma that I've been associated with mathematics. So much so that I don't think I'm going to even look at mathematics books the same. And there's a reason for this. And the reasons date back to 2010, when I was fresh out in college. And I believe it or not, I was going for the mathematics major. There was a young mathematics enthusiast. I was really excited for college and am able to do mathematics with incredible difficulty at the college. The professor was really good when it came to mathematics, probably one of the best I have seen when it comes to solving tough problems. I was really intrigued by him, and I asked him if he would tutor me in extra time, and he said that he will if I get one more pupil to sign up for it. Now, I did not know who I could possibly ask. And then Emily came at the exact moment and asked the professor the same thing that I did. And the professor said that now that we are here, we can start the tutoring. And I asked him if he wanted to teach us the extra in the library. He said, every time we do a problem, the librarian will try to quiet us. Let it go. We can do it in one of your dorms. I volunteered that we can study in mine since my roommate is out on an exchange program for 2 months. And so we decided upon that class will take place in my dorm. And so it did for the very next day. Emily and I were becoming friends during those classes, and we would hang out often after the class, and sometimes the professor would even hang out with us. And then one day, the professor gave us certain questions as the assignment for us, and we gladly accepted the extra work, knowing that it will only make us much more advanced in the understanding, so we did. The next day during the extra class in my dorm, the professor asked if we did the problem, and Emily said, "No, I haven't. I couldn't figure out the problem." And then the professor put his hand on her thigh and said, "That is all right. I will help you." And that was probably the first time that I thought the professor acted weird. But then when I recall all the touches I felt like he always acted like a creep around Emily. And then he asked me, and I told him that I actually did and said, I was actually looking into it, was getting close to solve it, and then I saw something and I saw that the answer that you gave us is wrong. The symbol by the end doesn't make sense with the question. And I could see in his eyes that there was rage building up as he was getting embarrassed by the blunder he just did. So I switched it up and said, "You were testing us, weren't you? You were trying to see if we get the blunder or blindly just get into solution, am I right?" And he said, "Well, yes, good work there." I saw Emily smirking as she also knew what I did there. We discussed, and we both agreed that he was being a little creep back there. And then we decided to end taking the class, and later just doing the problems together. She agreed, and we went our ways. I was going for the history class, and she had the art history. Emily told the professor that we will not need the classes anymore, and then later on he tried to talk to me about the classes and said, "Hey, I heard you and Emily don't need the classes anymore, and why would you do that? We are making such nice progress. And we can really get ahead of everyone, and I think it will be great for you and her." And I said, "You're right, but it's just that my roommate is coming back and we both are doing good, so I guess we can just stop now." And he said furiously, "You were not even close. It might seem that, but your lot just plain stupid, and I haven't even advanced the questions yet. Wait till you get the advanced part. You will be begging me to teach you again." And I said that it is all right and we have enough. But then I didn't realize what happened, and I was stone cold black. I remember his hand rushing towards me. That was the last thing I remember. When I woke up, I saw I was on the floor, and one of the students helped me get up. I checked my phone and I saw an hour had been passed. And that is when I saw the message, and it said, "Hey, it is me. I'm at your dorm. Where are you?" The professor said something about one last class. And I was worried about her, and I decided to rush into the room to see what was going on, and then one of the guys told me that Emily was seen with the professor heading to my dorm, and I rushed to the dorm. And when I reached, I realized it was too late. Emily was sitting on the bed and unconscious, and I realized something. And then the professor sent me the message, and it was a recording of him molesting Emily, but there was no face, and no one could identify that it was him. And then he tried blackmailing me into continuing the class along with Emily, but it was not my choice to make now. And I was sick of what he did. I wanted to kill him for that. Emily woke up and I told her everything, and she was traumatized by all of it. But she wasn't going to let him win, and decided that we will testify against him. And we gathered enough evidence against him. And then, when the time was right, we went for it and brought him down. It wasn't easy, it was difficult and traumatic, but we did it. Emily and I had been together since then, and mathematics is something that we both gave up. It was too traumatic and disgusting for us.
Back when I was a junior in high school, this guy transferred in from out of state who developed a serious obsession with me. It started out kind of harmless at first. He would try talking to me, but only ever about the weirdest stuff. Like if he'd been all sweet about asking me out, I definitely would have felt guilty turning him down, but because he was so obnoxious, I had zero qualms with telling him to get lost. A good example would be the first time I rejected him. Most guys might just take it in their stride, maybe think I was playing hard to get, but this kid heard my no and immediately just punched a locker right next to me. The sound of it had me jumping out of my skin, and the few doubts I had about rejecting him completely evaporated the moment he acted out like that. He didn't just punch the locker either, because he caused such a scene, he literally ran away from the lockers at full speed. It was seriously the most embarrassing and terrifying thing that had ever happened to me at that point. Well, at the hands of another human being anyway. He did seem to take a few steps back following this little outburst, but he soon redoubled his efforts, joining every after-school club I was a member of. When they were done, he'd follow me home at a distance. One time my dad caught him doing it and chased him up the street after that. It became this huge family issue. I just found the whole thing thoroughly mortifying, I guess because I just didn't get how serious it was. It was annoying, kind of scary even, but I didn't think he had what it took to actually hurt me. But as it turned out, that wasn't really the issue. After a few months of my turning down dates, he told me if I didn't want to go out with him, that he would take his own life. I still said no. I found stuff like that sort of emotional blackmail, to be frankly disgusting, and instead of having its intended effect to garner my sympathy, I hated this kid more than ever. The whole feeling was grounded in the idea that he just wouldn't do anything, that he didn't have the guts, the balls. He was all empty threats and grand theatrical displays, or so I thought. The next few days, he was missing from school. Rumors were around that he actually did take his own life, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't freak me out thinking he actually had gone through and done it. I mean, that'd be something that'd stay with me for the rest of my life. A kid told me he'd end himself if I didn't date him. I didn't, so he did. But God, if I didn't feel like punching him in the face as soon as he showed up again, I figured he'd just skip school for a few days to scare me a little bit. Mission accomplished. And this confirmed that he didn't have the balls to do it. He was wearing bandages when he showed up again and actually cornered me at lunch to say, "You made me do this." I just ignored him. I didn't want to actually ask to see the cuts, but a part of me is still so effing sure that they were covering up nothing at all. But the next big incident was at the end of our senior year. After a club meeting, I stayed behind to help clean up. My friend had stepped out to go grab something from their lockers, so I didn't see my stalker walk back into the room. He must have just saw his opportunity, came up behind me, and grabbed my chest. I don't remember what he said, but I was so freaked out that I actually squealed. That's the point I got the cops involved. As the room's security camera captured the whole thing, the whole ordeal ended up in court. He got a conviction, and I think his handsiness actually cost him his place at his preferred college, too. It was a little piece of revenge that I cherished, but it turned out it just gave him a whole bunch of free time that he could use to stalk me. I became absolutely paranoid with him hanging around my college campus, and by that stage he was exhibiting every possible behavior of a controlling, manipulative sociopath. I just remember being terrified that he'd eventually try something worse. I finally transferred schools, and about a year later, I started getting emails from him, most of which were apologies for how mean he was to me and asking if I forgave him. But the emails quickly turned into him begging for my Facebook info. I had him blocked on Facebook since high school, and I absolutely didn't want him to know where I was going to school, so I ended up blocking him on my email too. Since then, I've not heard from him again, and I have also moved across the country for another reason entirely. But the move honestly brought me a lot of relief that I wouldn't accidentally run into him sometime, and the whole cycle might start again.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Back when I was 13 years old, I was in middle school, and I really needed a math tutor who would give me classes since I was very bad at math and struggling. I considered my circle of friends very big, so I asked around for any recommendations for math tutors who would give me classes. And to my surprise, about 4 of my friends recommended the same person. Someone we'll call C for this story. I asked for C's number and they gave it to me. Then I texted him and asked him all about the classes. Questions like what time he would be available to come over and what the price of the class would cost. We discussed and planned a little bit, and then soon I'd be having my first class with him within a week. I was both nervous and ready. I wasn't a lazy or bad student, and it killed me that I couldn't get a grip of this math, so I was ready to bring my grades back up. But I was also nervous, because I just didn't know this guy. Well, he came over just in time, and we sat at a desk I have at my house. C was middle-aged, which really made me uncomfortable. But my parents seemed to like the guy. He presented himself well, and I had to give him credit for that. Besides, I had an important test coming up in some weeks, and I didn't know a thing, so there was no going back. The classes actually went really well. He was a patient and good teacher, and everything was normal. C was funny too, which made the classes pleasant of all things. The weeks went by, and I finally had to take my big math test, and I actually got a good grade on it. Seeing that my grades came up like that so quickly, I decided to keep studying with C, because I'd be starting geometry soon, and I already knew how bad I was at that subject as well. Classes were fun with C, and everything was fine. My friends gave me really good comments about him, and I soon stopped feeling uncomfortable about his age. Time went by, and everything was great, until one class. My school has guidance class second period, and we usually do nothing, so I talk to people and fool around. I was talking to a friend of mine one day about how nervous we were for the upcoming test, and she asked me who was my tutor. She knew I had one, but she didn't know who, and I told her it was C. The teacher walking by heard me mention him, so she asked me if he was my tutor. I said yes, but she gave me this shocked expression. I'd never seen her that way, and no lie, it gave me chills. She told me that I need to stop seeing him immediately. She said that he harasses his students once he gains their trust, and she told me a story of a girl who studied with him. She trusted him a bit too much, and C began to touch her. She became uncomfortable and began to back away from C, but C would keep touching and harassing her. It came to the point where her mother reported him to the police, but they couldn't do anything since they didn't have enough evidence and couldn't arrest him. Not to mention at the time he was well trusted and liked around the community. I was actually shocked when I heard this. I asked my teacher if there were any more victims, and she said yes, but most of them are too afraid to come forward to the police. So they go to the school psychiatrist, who was the teacher I was talking to, since it was the guidance class. She continued, saying that he would often do magic tricks to gain trust. I remembered a time where he showed me how he made an eraser disappear and reappear. Everything she was warning me about, he was doing. Right after that class, I called the 4 friends who had recommended C, and I told them to stop seeing him. I told them everything. We stopped contacting C, and we blocked his number. But that didn't stop him from showing up at my house. He stopped by one day, asking my parents if I still needed help, and by then I told my parents everything. They told him to leave and to never come back, but I'll never forget the look he gave me as I watched from the living room. Even after hearing the bad news that I would no longer need a mentor and that we knew about his terrible past, He stood there with a smile, baring his teeth at me. He stared straight into my eyes, and it's almost like he was telling me that this wasn't the last I would see of him. I had nightmares after that. To this day, I'm scared to get another tutor for any classes. I'm very much in disbelief I was in a situation like that, and I'm thankful that one of my teachers knew about C. I don't want to know what C would have done to me if we spent more time together, and luckily, I haven't heard from him since.
Since my very youngest days, I was treated as a golden child. My mother heaped buttloads of affection onto me and bragged to her friends how great of a son I was. I fear my younger brother missed out because she had already spent all of the love she had on me, so to speak. I joke about this, but I am somewhat serious at the same time. His upbringing lacked much of the praise and attention I was given. When I began playing in organized sports, the rest of the world joined in. Soccer came first. It all came so naturally, and before long, I was the top-scoring member of the team. Once I discovered football, everything else went by the wayside. Posters of Brady and Bledsoe covered my walls. My large, strong hands allowed me to grip and throw the ball with the power and precision not many twice my age had. All 3 years of middle school, I remained the starting quarterback. I did so well that by high school, I was playing on par with most seniors. My prowess in sports, of course, made me very popular in school. One of my teachers called me the big man on campus. I was never lacking the attention and approval of the staff and most of my fellow students. I didn't get a free ride, though. Without good grades, I wasn't qualified to play. Luckily for me, I had always been good at most subjects, except for perhaps math, in which I scored lower Bs. I had decided by my second year which college I would attend. I knew if I continued on my current path, I'd be quarterbacking for a professional team right out of college. To encompass all I had achieved, I quote a line I had once read that described a man as having the world in the palm of his hand. That's probably the best way I could describe the trajectory I had put upon myself. I was destined for success, and nothing was going to get in my way. I tell you all this in order to show just how far I was soon to fall, and exactly how much I was about to lose. I was a junior. I had already been named the starter on the varsity team. When not studying, I split my time between the weight room and practice. It was just before the third game of the season when Rosalind arrived. I had my mind off somewhere else when she entered our class. I still remember it like it was yesterday. A few of my classmates were grumbling about something, and it caught my attention. I happened to look up just as she was passing near me, and her beauty was breathtaking. I can honestly say with confidence you've never seen her equal in Hollywood. The rich silkiness of her auburn hair, to the sensual fullness of her lips and her porcelain skin, not an inch of her image had a flaw. I gave her my heart in that moment, and I knew nothing would equal her in my life. She took her seat at the back of the class. None of the shyness that usually existed in the newly arrived students showed in her actions. The room was hers completely now, and she knew it. My focus was on her for the remainder of the period. She had to have known. My gaze would have burned right through her had my eyes been lasers. This day marked the beginning of a long downhill slide, and I would give anything to experience every second of that time again. Concentrating on anything else was impossible. Class after class, only Rosalind existed. Practice was much the same. I wasn't on a football field. I was still in that class, soaking in every inch, every curve of her body. From then on, my only thoughts were about her. I used my charm to get her address from an office worker. That Friday evening, as I led the team to another victory, my only desire was for the game to end. Afterwards, I sat outside her house dreaming about her and I, walking hand in hand through the halls as everyone watched jealously. I resolved in that moment that I would own her body and soul until the end of my life. My first action upon arriving at school that following Monday was to locate Rosalind and bare my heart to her. I did just that, but her reaction wasn't what I'd envisioned. I spoke from my heart. Every word was true, but rather than collapse into my arms as I'd seen on TV so many times, she replied with 4 short words. I don't think so. I will admit to being disappointed, but her response left me with a ray of hope. She hadn't been cruel or mocking after all. Perhaps she had been playing hard to get. I knew I had to pursue her as a hunter pursues his prey. Maybe I would even be required to make a large sacrifice to prove my love. After all, that's the way it works in the great Hollywood films and novels. She would realize she belonged with me. I just needed to help her realize that. I searched my soul, day and night, for a way to make this happen. Suddenly it hit from out of the blue. If I gave up football, she would have to see how dedicated I was to her. That day I informed the coach of my decision. It went about as well as you would think. He was angry and yelled for almost an hour, but at the end of our meeting, he wished me well. I was elated. I had to tell Rosalind that very second. She didn't answer my text right away, but when she did, her only answer was, "Why?" The queasiness churned up in my stomach. Even after all I'd done to let her know I loved her, putting it into words still made me very nervous. "I did it for you," I said. My hands shook as they moved to push send. It was now or never. She would be left with no doubt to how I felt about her. After sending it, the time seemed to drag on forever. The hours passed with no word from her, and I couldn't take it any longer. I sped over to her house and waited outside her window. I watched as she changed for bed. Every curve, every line of her body remains with me to this day. I sent a new text to let her know that I was waiting. She appeared at her window within seconds. Seeing her in the nightgown made my heart race. And there was only one reason she would let me see her this way. My mouth was dry with anticipation. I broke into a sweat. I expected to be met with soft words, but instead she began yelling, almost screaming. Her words didn't make sense. I was confused by her behavior. It only got worse when her father came outside. I tried to explain my love for his beautiful daughter, but he was deaf to my words. Rosalind began to curse me from her window, terrible things I don't dare repeat here. I never dreamed this could have happened. With every word, her curses knocked me lower and lower. It was a pain I'd not wish on anyone. I was so distraught I didn't hear the word police until it was almost too late. I fled just as I noticed flashing lights up the street. I lay down in my car as they passed and sped away as they pulled up to Rosalind's house. My sobs grew and grew until I was consumed by my grief. I laid curled up upon my bed, wailing uncontrollably. However, as my tears began to subside, another fire kindled inside. My anger roared by the second, until it consumed any sadness I once had. And by dawn, I transformed into some sort of beast. A monster I never knew existed in me had taken control of my body. I began to rage. I thought, no one says those things to someone who loves them. They know the power they have over them. The idea of punishment fleeted in and out of my brain, briefly at first, then more and more until it set root and fostered a plan for retribution. I see now just how far I had gone. My love, if that's what you can call it, had transformed from obsession into hate. The quickness in which this occurred still terrifies me. In that day and in that time, I could only think of one thing: revenge. She had to feel my pain. There was no other way she could learn what she had done. I entered the school that morning with a single, focused purpose. My anger had clouded my mind from considering the consequences of what I was about to do. I could see the terror in her eyes as I drew closer, and I could remember feeling satisfied by this. I said nothing. I just grabbed her by the throat, both hands gripping as tightly as possible, and I knew it wouldn't take long. My grip was strong and my hands were large. I was oblivious to the grabbing and pulling of others around me. Her face took on a dark red, then almost purple hue, and I knew it wouldn't be long now. I stared into her beautiful green eyes that I had dreamt of for countless hours, and was awed by them, even as they filled with the streaking of blood. My adoration angered me even more. The next thing I remember was lying on the school floor being held down. The din of their yells seemed muffled. I was miles away, lost in the confusing pattern of the ceiling tiles above me. I'm not sure how long it was before I was told Rosalind had survived. It appeared I had been stopped before I was able to achieve my goal. This news didn't anger me, nor was I relieved. I had become numb. It's taken me many months to reclaim the identity I once was. I was terrified to feel anything. I'd become nothing more than a frightened child. I've been fortunate enough to be sent to an institution that focuses on therapeutic rehabilitation. I'm by no means fully healed, for the lack of a better word. There still are moments where I find myself giving over to my dark side. I don't necessarily blame the entertainment industry for the way they portray relationships or the pursuit of love in a wider context. I'm responsible for the way I handle the situation. Something inside of me is broken. However, in the same breath, I do question what impression they intend on presenting. A young, naive, and romantic man such as myself is inundated with talk of the so-called game and the premise of sacrificing for love, among other trite concepts. Without any real guidance from a more experienced adult or father figure, a young male often uses images from the popular entertainment around him. It is a discussion that should be had, considering more boys are growing up without a positive male role model in their lives. Please pardon me for going off onto my own path. I still require a lot of work. The purpose of writing this was to recount the events that led me to my current position. My counselor and I agreed that it would be a good idea to put my story and my feelings at the time on paper. It could serve as a motivating factor for myself and others to see how far I've come in my therapy. Now that I have, it is certainly encouraging to see the progress I've made. At the same time, it's shed light upon the darker side of my personality, and that has been a horrifying vision. Despite this, I'm confident I'm on the path to regaining my true self, and perhaps one day you'll recognize the brother you grew up with. I've just about written down everything I can recall from that time, and lights out is quickly approaching. I'll make a copy of this for my counselor, minus a little epilogue to you. Of course, I'll be sending you this version for yourself. Feel free to share it with your mom or anybody else in the family that may be curious. I've written Mom a short note just about regular stuff and sent it last week, so she should receive that soon. If you have the time, I'd like you to do something like we discussed and seek out the proper place on the internet to share this. All I ask is that you leave out my name, but I probably don't have to tell you that. I'm sure you don't normally tell people your older brother is psycho. I'd like young people to be able to read an authentic account of what goes on in the mind of someone like me without all the sensationalistic fluff. I don't seek notoriety or fame for what I've done. It is an inexcusable act against one I profess to love. My hope is that it can serve as a template for the young, a diagnostic instrument to help them recognize the same patterns in their friends or themselves and stop them before they get out of control. I'd like to think if more people had access to this type of information, things like stalking and the crimes that go with it may be able to be stopped completely, or at the least greatly reduced. I'll continue to do all I can to stem the tide from here. Perhaps, if enough on the outside can see this, we can create a better world for everyone.